All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Designing Distance Learning to Support ELLs. I'd like to really thank you for your commitment to ensuring that our English language learners have access to their instructional materials during this time of remote instruction. Um, right now, I just want to introduce Kurt Hassenflug, who teaches English language arts and English as a new language at Shaker High School. Kurt has done some presenting for us on scaffolding for English language learners in the fall, and that was an outstanding workshop, and we're fortunate enough to have him presenting for us again today. So without any more nonsense, well, wait, a little more nonsense. Please use the Q&A or the chat for questions, and we'll try to address them towards the end. With this many participants, it's a little bit difficult to address everything within the flow of the presentation, but we will try to make an effort at the end to address questions. And so thanks again, and I'm going to turn it over to Kurt.
All right, hi everybody, and can everybody hear me okay? Let's start with that. Perfect. I see in the chat, people are saying yes, fantastic. Okay, so welcome to Designing Distance Learning to Support ELLs. I think we had like 200 people sign up for this, which is fantastic. So thank you all for your dedication to your craft, first and foremost. You know, it means a lot that you're here. Of course, now that I think about it, you couldn't really be anywhere else if you wanted to be right now. So without further ado, let's get started. So I want to talk to you about some other workshop titles we considered. This month has been a long year. 2020 is officially the year we can't have nice things. And can I have ice cream for lunch? My wife is 7.5 months pregnant. This is an actual thing. She both asked and then decided yes, she could. So thought I'd share. Okay, onward. Best practices for a Zoom meeting. Most of you have done this already. I think we have the macro set on this, but I just want to remind you, please keep your microphones muted. I will call on people for questions at the end if we have the ability to do that. You are all muted now. I see somebody asking that in the chat. Yes, right now you are all muted. We have the macro level control on that, but I just, you know, things happen. People accidentally unmute. So I just want to make sure I bring that up. I see National Ice Cream for Breakfast is tomorrow, so perfect. Wear headphones if you have them. You'll have better experiences with audio and asking questions. And if you are on camera, please be aware that you are on camera. Feel free to shut off the camera if you want to, or turn it on if you need to ask a question, whatever the case may be. All right, moving on. A little bit about my background. I'm not going to go through every bit of detail on this, but I've been teaching about 11 years now. I think an advantage that I bring to this is I'm certified as both an ENL teacher and an ELA teacher, grades 5 to 12 for ELA, K-12 for ENL. I've been teaching about 11 years. You can see the various places that I've taken coursework. I just got my national board certification last year, so very excited about that. And I do consultant work with Metratech and NICED, NICED ELT, and CASTA. I see Naomi says, congratulations. Thank you so much. Congrats from a couple people. I appreciate it. So some caveats about today. I want to remind you, and I think it's important to point out, that this is a rapidly evolving situation. I see the mic is a little hot and clipping, so I'm going to try to adjust that and talk a little bit quieter. This is a rapidly evolving situation, and the expectations of teachers and students are constantly changing, and that's okay. You know, which brings me to the next point. Something my superintendent said in a meeting that we had last week that actually really stuck with me. He spoke a lot about showing grace to your students, your fellow teachers, administrators, your handsome, well-prepared webinar facilitators. My wife is going to kill me for leaving that line in. And most importantly, yourselves. This is a once in a generation event. It's okay to be human, and it's okay for the answer to be, I don't know, sometimes. You know, the reality is this is changing constantly. I mean, even talking to my administrators, there are things they don't know, and that's okay, right? it's a rapidly evolving situation, so all we can do is best be prepared for the information that we have available to us right now. Some overarching philosophy that I'm going to talk to you about for today. Not every district has access to every platform. I'm going to do my best to provide a variety of resources, but my main goal is to present underlying instructional design philosophy that can be adjusted to any platform. It's more about the big ideas and the reasons why we choose to do certain things that are driving all of this. So, onward. I see some people asking questions about whether or not they can be seen. To the best of my knowledge, yours are primarily off right now, but I'll have Kaz to work on the other end to try to address that just to get some clarification. But I believe they're set natively to be off. So some learning platforms that I am going to address today, I have this slide I call my Kingdom for Digital Learning Platform. So the Google suite of tools, Canvas, Blackboard, there are a lot of other LMSs out there, others. If your district uses a different learning suite, I know there's Moodle and a couple others out there, please feel free to bring it up. I see somebody mentioned Seesaw. I'll do my best to address as many of these as possible during the presentation. So, first thing I would love for everybody to do right now is, if at all possible, if you have access to a pen and paper, or you want to open up a document, or you can just do it mentally, I would love to create a KWL chart right now, and I'm sure you all know what a KWL chart is. Little side joke on this, my ELL students, a few of them are obsessed with this Korean pop band called BTS, and I always call them KWL, and it drives them nuts, so figured I'd leave that in. So for the K today, I want you to really focus in on what do you already know about best practices in distance learning for all students, and best practices when specifically working with ELLs. So take a moment and address that. Then what I would like to do is, what are you hoping to learn about today? And just jot some of that down. So I'll give you all just a moment to address that. All right, onward. Okay, mantras and key terms. So the first mantra I want to talk about today is acknowledging reality. What I mean by acknowledging reality is, it's really important to keep in mind that as much as we are trying to focus on the learning and the content and the skills, the world has changed. This, for a certain generation, I was, let's see, I'm going to date myself here, but I think I was in 10th grade on 9/11. And that the world sort of changed that day. So the reality is, with what is going on right now, the world is changing, and things are never going to be quite the same after that. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that as important as everything that we do in the classroom, everything that we want to do with and for our students is, the world is changing, and sometimes school is not going to be the top priority, and that is okay. Which brings me to my next point, humans first. Our main mantra today is really going to be putting the human aspects first. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, so I don't want to get into that too much right now. Good faith effort. What I mean by this is, if your ELLs you feel they're doing the best they can, even if they're not completing everything, and you are doing the best that you can based on your circumstances, because I know we're all trying to do things like homeschool children while this is going on, dealing with regular family obligations, dealing with the possibility of, having family members who might live in areas that have been hit harder than the capital region. It's doing the, yes, I see somebody mention sick loved ones with COVID. Absolutely. So if you are doing the best that you can, given the circumstances, that matters, right? Good faith effort. Next thing I want to think about is equity is key. So we have our little chart over here where we can see equality, equity, and reality over on the chart there. So we can see equality, not everybody's seeing over the fence. I'm sure many of you have seen this chart before. Equity, everybody can see over the fence. And then we have the reality. So the goal is we're starting with the box on the right and trying to move into the center, right? So some students may have everything they need. They may have parents who will sit down at the kitchen table with them and help them get through every last bit of this work. And we have other students, particular ELLs, who are really vulnerable right now because many of them don't even have parents who speak the same language that they do at home. So there's no one who can answer their questions about COVID or about algebra or about anything else, and we need to keep that in mind. Right, and I see other people mentioning equity issues of devices to access the internet, and that's actually a thing we're going to talk about in a couple slides, but great point, absolutely. So the multimodal learning is the name of the game. If you take one thing away from this, I want you to remember multimodal learning. Multimodal learning basically means we're not just presenting things verbally. We're not just presenting things in writing. We're not just presenting graphics. We're combining these modalities, right? We want to address the speaking and listening and reading and writing as much as possible for all of them. Yeah, a lot of great points here about students caring for younger siblings, taking on a parent role. Absolutely. The format to this is new-ish, and I mean that about distance learning, but the underlying concepts are not. The reality is there's kind of a thing we say in the ELL field that good teaching for ELLs is really just good teaching. So that doesn't go away when it comes to distance learning. Last thing I want to mention, all teachers are teachers of reading, all teachers are teachers of ELLs. So these messages are not just for those of you who work directly with ELLs as ENL support teachers, but classroom teachers, content teachers, all teachers are teachers of ELLs. All right, rule number 1, humans first. So I want to talk to you a little about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and something to keep in mind right now. ELLs and their families are some of the most vulnerable members of our community right now. The reality is school is just not going to matter that much if people's most essential needs are not being met. They're not likely to engage in education because, you know, that's one of those higher areas when we want them to engage in metacognition and improving what they're doing. If they don't have basic needs like food and shelter and getting enough sleep and proper clothing, none of this other stuff matters. So don't be afraid to reach out to your ELLs, but do it as a human first. I see somebody asking, will we be sending out this presentation? There will be a recording sent out, and I can probably send out the slides too. I'll make sure I speak to Jerome over at Casta about that. So humans first, how you can help. If you're looking for a way to reach out to your students, do it as a human first. Things like check in with your ELLs. Are the basic needs being met? Make sure they know how to get help for their families if they need it. Lots of people are hurting right now, particularly the vulnerable members of our community. The reality is that some things are just more important than school. So do your ELLs have appropriate access to food? Most districts are providing meals, but students might not have a way to get there to pick them up. Talk to your districts and try to help facilitate connections for these families. Do your ELLs families know how to access healthcare? This is a tricky conversation to have because you don't want to violate FERPA laws or anything like that, but you can have conversations and just make sure they know how to do this if they need to. Make sure they have access to things like social services if they need to. Do your ELLs have the time to do schoolwork? As many of you mentioned, they're being relied upon for care for younger siblings while their parents are still working during this. There's not much that we can do about this except not make them feel guilty and be empathetic to their situations. Do they have Wi-Fi at home? The Spectrum is offering free Wi-Fi right now to support families in this difficult time, but as I see somebody mention in the chat, and actually I'd read about this earlier, Spectrum actually has a backlog of people right now because I don't think there was a realization that there were so many people that didn't have access to things that some of us take for granted, like access to Wi-Fi in the home or, you know, high-speed internet. So all these basic human needs kind of come first. Then we can talk about school. So an idea of how I have been addressing some of this with my students is I sort of we call it an ENL press conference every day with the ENL students. So we've been doing daily 1 o'clock meetings with 9 through 12 students since the crisis began. And we have 60 something students at the high school. I'm blanking on the exact number right now. But it's great. We've had as many as 48 students show up to the chat at one time. We do a video chat. It's myself and the other two 9th and 10th grade students or teachers, 9 through 12 ENL teachers at the high school. And all three of us sit there and we spend as long as an hour and a half before just answering any questions that the ELLs have. And they ask a lot of questions. Very few of them are about school, and that's okay. You know, they're asking questions. I mean, we're getting questions like, if I eat a lot of, I saw on Instagram, if I eat a lot of garlic, it'll keep me from getting COVID-19. Is this true? And of course I'll tell them, no, that'll do a good job for keeping vampires away, but it's not necessarily going to help with COVID. I see a lot of great questions in the chat. I can't wait to address some of this at the end. So just reach out to your ELLs as human beings first. I think it's a really, really helpful strategy. All right, rule number 2, help students prioritize, or the Edwin Drake problem. So I'll explain what this means. This is actually kind of a fire I've been putting out the last couple of days, where I teach ENL and ELA at the high school level, and I have students reaching out to me and expressing that they're absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of work that they're receiving right now. I also have a few kids that are spending all their time playing video games. But some ENL students are completely overwhelmed. So it's really important to have those conversations with the ENL students and with their teachers about how can we prioritize. So here's why I call this the Edwin Drake problem. So if I said, tell me about Edwin Drake, probably my history teachers and a few others in here could tell me a lot about him. But if I hadn't looked it up before, I don't think I could. I know I learned at one point in time who Edwin Drake was, but it wasn't readily coming to mind. Now, if I said, tell me about John D. Rockefeller, you could tell me all about him. Both people serve the same purpose when talking about, wealthy industrialists in history, basically. But what is the most important information for them to know? As lovely as it would be to have students read a paragraph on John D. Rockefeller and on Edwin Drake and some of the other famous industrialists of the time period, the reality is, if we're trying to just get the most important information across, talking about Rockefeller is probably enough right now. So that's a good conversation to have with both your students and with some of your fellow educators, your colleagues. So I want to talk about some of the basics of creating a language-rich digital environment. A lot of the same stuff that goes for in-class goes for digital learning. The goal, especially with ELLs, is comprehensible input. So here's what that means. We're focusing on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. The way to get there is to use multimodal learning. Scaffold, scaffold, scaffold. Also scaffold. What I mean by that is construct ways for students to access information that keep language from getting in the way, right? We want them to grow with content even if they don't have the language skills to access it. And, as difficult as it is to modify all the time, the reality is important conversations right now with our colleagues who are in the core disciplines, history, science, social studies, for entering and emerging students, they need modifications more now than ever. There's just no way that they can handle the exact same work as every other student, and that's okay. Even if the easy, you go with an easy modification, like, okay, here's 10 questions. Choose any 3 that you want to work on right now. Something like that might be enough. All right, quickly talking about synchronous learning. we should say bye, bye, bye to it, right? Terrible joke. But synchronous learning is online instruction that is provided live, basically like what we're doing right now. Students engage with the teacher in real time. Whole class synchronous instruction can be really, really, really problematic for ELLs because it's much more difficult to provide context in real time. The cognitive burden is massive. They have to focus on navigating the meaning of what you're saying and trying to learn the content at the same time, and it's just too much. It's really challenging also for you to provide scaffolds for live instruction when you're not right there in the room with them, and perform assessment of whether or not they're getting it, right? Those formative assessments that we use constantly to assess where our ELLs are at, they're so much more difficult to do when you're doing live instruction online. That means it's difficult to make adjustments on the fly because of the type of prep that has to go into synchronous digital instruction. So asynchronous learning. Asynchronous learning is provided basically with an open timetable. Students can access the materials on their own time. It has a number of benefits for ELLs. It's more opportunities for appropriate scaffolding materials. They can access material in their own time, and it's a low pressure environment. Students can focus on content if material has been properly scaffolded to lighten the language burden. So one strategy might be a combined approach. Synchronous learning might be appropriate if it's conducted in small groups. Students are provided prep materials such as an agenda, possible sentence frames to help them ask questions, etc. I see somebody in the chat mentioned we are using Google Meet as a support tool after they have had the materials. That is a fantastic way to do it. It's primarily used to help maintain the human element of instruction. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but one of the good things about them seeing you on video is ELLs rely so much on cues of body language, reading lips, etc., to sort of glean meaning. And so that human aspect of instruction is important. I mean, it can also work in recorded videos, which again, I'll talk about a little later, but still hugely important for them. The other thing about synchronous instruction is that it also should work as asynchronous instruction. So any live videos that you're doing, record them so that so that they can be posted later for students who do have additional responsibilities at home, other classes they're trying to navigate, or they just want to rewatch the lesson. I've had many students express to me that they love being able to rewatch lessons, so that's really important. All right, the tools. So we'll talk about some of the tools that are available out there. Keep in mind, tools are just that, they're tools. They're not instruction, and they actually require instructions, or we end up sort of planting chickens. So I see a good question here that I want to address quickly. Are districts seeking parental permission to record Google Meet? My understanding is that they are not required to seek parental permission for that because it is EdLaw 2D. Google Meet is EdLaw 2D compliant, and it is also FERPA compliant, but double check with your districts on that. But that was the information that we got from the Capital Region BOCES group. So that's the good sort of degree to which I can speak to that. So planting chickens. Here's what I mean by planting chickens. There's an anecdote that one of my college professors used, and it's kind of stuck with me. So there's a tobacco farmer who all of a sudden is not doing well with tobacco, and he sees and hears friends that have gotten chickens and are doing really well and making a lot of money raising chickens. So he says, hey, how can I get in on this action? And so his friend sends him some chickens. And a few weeks later, he calls his friend, and he says, I don't know what I'm doing wrong with these chickens. I'm rotating them in the field. I added more water. I took less water. I tried burying them deeper and put them a little bit higher up in the soil. Nothing's working. The moral of the story is, if you give a person a tool and they don't know how to use it properly, they haven't received that instruction, we end up planting chickens. So if you're having students use a tool, it's really, really important that you teach them how to use it first. Take a second, take a drink of water here. Okay, so best practices when it comes to videos. If you're going to use videos with your students, providing a transcript can be really helpful. Teach students how to turn on closed captions, translated captions, and slow down videos. Many of those features are YouTube only, but they're really, really useful. If you don't know how to do that, if you hit the little gear button when you go into YouTube, you'll see this wealth of options there that are really, really useful. As I mentioned before, ELLs rely on context clues to decipher meaning. Context clues include gestures and body language, reading lips, vocal intonation, images and visual cues, reactions of others. So in doing a flipped learning video, try to put the work side by side with the video of you delivering the instruction. Keeping in mind that language is fundamentally social. So when we remove our physical being from the videos, we're removing one of the key cues to language. And that's not helpful for ELLs. So I want to show you a quick little example of a video I recorded for my ELLs earlier today and sent it out to them. All right, everybody. I'm seeing a lot of people are saying they can't hear the video. Well, I could turn on the closed captions. The settings look okay on my end right now. So what I will do is just sort of give you the gist of what I'm saying in it. And luckily, they're in the key points as well. So what I am describing to my students is ways that they can prioritize their instruction. And I would guess that the video will work when we send this out when we send the actual presentation out to everybody, not the video of the presentation. But I just reminded my ELLs to complete 2.5 hours of work per week. But I also told them, however much work you get done after 2.5 hours, walk away. You're done. Because we get it. Like my ELLs and your ELLs over the course of a week, 2.5 hours might not look the same way it looks for the non-ELLs in your classes, and that's okay, right? So what I told my kids as an English teacher, so I'm talking specifically about my integrated 9th, 10th, and 11th grade English classes that have both ELLs and non-ELLs, focus on the reading and the audiobooks because good stories are what we need right now. So that's kind of an idea. I created this using WeVideo, which I will talk about later today, but other ways you can record video. Screencast-O-Matic can be great for sort of showing them how to do something, demonstrating it while you're also recording your voice along with it. All right, tools within the Google Suite. So I see the question, 2.5 hours. So it's supposed to be 2.5 hours for the week. At the secondary level, 2.5 hours per class per week is the example. It is basically what we've gotten from state ed and from our administration. That is the number that came from state ed, is my understanding of it. I also see people mentioning iMovie. iMovie is great. I like WeVideo because it's web-based, but there's lots of other tools out there that you can do it. So feel free to share those in the comments. Okay, I want to talk to a little bit about Google Translate and kind of the theory of the case with Google Translate. There's a lot of so I see somebody asking, what question was that? Was 2.5 the answer for? 2.5 to 3 hours a week is the estimated amount of week per credit-bearing course that it's the amount of work that we were recommended to give per credit-bearing course per week at the secondary level. I can't speak to the lower grade levels, but that's what my district, North Colony, has recommended to us. And my understanding is that number came from our regional BOCES, who in turn got that information from state ed. So on to Google Translate. Google Translate is sort of a mixed bag in the ENL field. There are a lot of there are a lot of sort of rumors out there about how Google Translate works. And so I want to try to clear up some of the misinformation that's out there about Google Translate. Google Translate does primarily rely on what's called procedurally generated translation, which means it is essentially done by an AI algorithm. It is computer generated. However, there's also something called the mechanical Turk phenomenon. So the mechanical Turk phenomenon, strangely enough, is actually something that was sort of pioneered by Amazon. And what that means is there's certain aspects that are designed to look like they were placed there by a computer, but what they were actually vetted by human beings. And that is part of what Google Translate does with their translations. They actually outsource translations to actual human beings who sit there at a computer and evaluate the quality of the translation and then offer suggestions for improvement. And so Google's AI algorithm picks up on this information that is coming from actual people. And so the translation is constantly improving. It has gotten significantly better, particularly for languages for which there are more people using them. So for example, Google translation from English to Spanish has gotten to a point where anything outside of idiomatic language or figurative language, it's pretty good. It's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. But if you're looking at trying to do a language where there are fewer people who speak it, or where there's less likely to be much translation going on, something like English to Dari, it will likely not be as good. So to the extent that Google Translate isn't very accurate, sometimes it's not. I agree. I see people mentioning some other translation tools, which is awesome. Fantastic. Please share those in the comments. That's great. I think the reality of the Translate is if you have kids where you've tried everything else, you do not know what else to do with them, Google Translate is not a bad last resort, because even if the translation is only 10% accurate, understanding 10% is still better than understanding 0%. It's not a replacement for instruction that is designed with the ELLs in mind. It is a last resort, but it can't hurt. So best practices: avoid idioms. They never translate well because they're figurative in nature. So poetry on Google Translate, kind of a no-go. Translate whole documents using tools in Google Docs. So if you have a Google Doc open and click on tools, you can translate an entire document without copying and pasting it into a Google Translate window. I found that also does, for whatever reason, help improve the accuracy. I've had some students kind of vet it for me. For whatever reason, it seems to more accurately translate. I see some other tips for Google Translate being used in the side window. They're fantastic. Avoid PDFs when possible. There are massive formatting issues when trying to copy and paste. So PDFs, not great with ELLs. And then one other thing I'd recommend, get the Translate Chrome extension and ask your students to do the same. So I want to show you kind of a cool thing. Many of you probably know about this already, but it's a really useful trick with Google Translate. So if you have the Chrome extension, if you open, so this is an article that was in the New York Times earlier today. I'm going to go to my Translate extension. I'm going to click Translate this page. I'll give it a second here. So I just translated the entire page into Arabic. It's likely not a perfect translation, but again, good faith effort, it is better than nothing, right? So just a little example of kind of a powerful way to use Google Translate. The other great thing is we can see the original text side by side. I see people mentioning the longer the doc, the less accurate. Sometimes, depends. It depends on what kind of document it is. If there's very little idiomatic language, it can sometimes be okay with like news articles and that kind of thing. So the Google extension is just called, it's just Google Translate Chrome extension. Right, so I see somebody mentioning fiction versus nonfiction. For nonfiction, it's typically going to be better because fiction tends to be more idiomatic just based on the nature of what it is. All right, onward. Best practices in designing for accessibility. All right, Google Classroom. Google Classroom is great for a lot of things. So I want to talk to you about Google Classroom. It is fantastic for collecting digital work. A word of advice, and I've had this conversation with a few of my colleagues, using the sharing method to digitally collect work, that used to be what we had to do before Google Classroom existed. Now that we have Google Classroom, the sharing method can actually be more confusing and sort of unwieldy, even at the best of times. It makes staying organized with it more difficult than it needs to be for you and your students, because that Google Classroom panel at the side, they can show all their missing work. I have some kids who really, really rely on that. So don't put, my advice would be, don't put yourselves or your students through that right now. Keep it simple and collect work through Google Classroom whenever possible. It's great for distributing materials, great for grading digital work and communicating feedback on digital work, because I know we're not necessarily grading, but we are providing feedback, and sometimes numerical feedback is not a bad thing. They're just not grades that we're putting in our traditional grade books right now. It's also great for communicating due dates and missed assignments. All right, next. Here's what Google Classroom is not great for. So sometimes it works well for communication, sometimes it doesn't. Kids tend to disable the notifications, and so then it sort of only works if they check it, right? Google Translate can also, or sorry, Google Classroom can also be problematic when it comes to actually designing lessons and instruction, particularly for ELLs, because the organization options are limited with Google Classroom. You can't bold fonts, you can't italicize things. It's unwieldy sometimes to rearrange certain aspects of either the stream or classwork sections. Yes, you can do it, but it's not necessarily intuitive to follow for instruction. Typically, it has to rely on narratives to communicate tasks, which are not necessarily intuitive. And it can be really confusing for ELLs because it's really difficult to provide context for a narrative in an intuitive way, where context is provided at the same time as instruction. I'll show you a couple ways that I feel are better for doing that going forward here. So what I would recommend is that Google Classroom and Google Sites extension, or sorry, integration is really, it's really changed my teaching practices. So there are a number of benefits to doing this. For one, it has way more organization options. There's more opportunities to engage in a multimodal approach. You get better alignment of assignments with instruction. It tends to play nicely with tools like Read, Write, Kurzweil, Google Translate. I see some folks, can you send us the link to the example here? So I'm actually going to, I'm going to click on it and open it here so you'll be able to see it. Yes, you will have access to the slideshow. I know I'm going a little fast, but yes, we're going to send out the slideshow to all of you, so don't worry about that. So here's an example of a Google site that I've created for my 9th graders. So this is my 9th grade integrated class where it's ELLs and non-ELLs in the same classroom. So let me get the chat out of the way quickly here. All right, we can see literary device notes. You can click on that. It says task 1, assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4. The way I have this set up is students will go through and they do the things in order. And again, if I wanted to use that Google Translate extension, it could actually translate the whole page for me. Here's the beauty of organizing assignments here. So we see these little Google buttons that I put here. It says GCA. That means Google, for my kids, that means Google Classroom Assignment. They know to click on that button, and the button, instead of them having to find an assignment on Google Classroom, hunt around for it, it takes them directly to the assignment. So it helps to mitigate that question of, wait, what are we doing? Because it takes them directly to the assignments. So they would click on that. This is a Google form quiz that I did with the kids. Been very, very useful. So again, Google Sites, Google Classroom integration, I highly recommend it as a sort of a best practice. Let me pull the chat back up here. Okay. I see people asking about Google Slides. I will be getting there. So Yes, there is a translation option for the site. I could just click the button and it would do it. I see people mentioning HyperDocs and Google Docs and post those for multi-step instructions. Absolutely. That's, it's a little more involved process, but super, super handy. Okay. So I talked about the benefits for integrating Google Sites and Google Classroom. It says, does the site still show up in the Google Classroom homepage like other classes? Great question. So I can actually show you briefly what that looks like. Taking one of my Google Classrooms. And let's go to English 9R. So what I do whenever I post what they're to do for the week, I also post a link to the website. So it'll take them directly to it. Okay, let's talk about Google Drive and some best practice with Google Drive. Now, there are a lot of add-ons that you can do with Google Drive. I'm not going to get into too many of the add-ons, but they're a great way to really increase what you can do with it. As somebody mentioned, HyperDocs is fantastic. I see somebody mentioning, wouldn't that be double the work? So it actually isn't, because you're really only using Google Classroom primarily as a place to post the assignments. You're not actually doing the instruction there. All right, so Google Docs, easy whole document translation using tools. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of images, they're not the easiest thing to manipulate, so keep that in mind when working with ELLs. Slides are great for certain things. Slides are very easy to organize in an intuitive way, but they're not easy to translate. You can't just do a full document translate feature. If another thing I want to point out to you is that slides do tend to require slightly more technical skill on the student end if things shift around too much. And we have a lot of teachers who use interactive workbooks, and interactive workbooks can be great until they're not. They can get a little cumbersome. Keep in mind that Chromebooks are very low-powered computers. So Google Slides notebooks that tend to have a lot in them are very slow for students to use because they're just a lot for the Chromebooks to handle. Google Forms, huge fan of creating self-grading quizzes for students on Google Forms because Google Forms translates easily. It provides instant feedback for them. It scales well to mobile. I have a lot of kids who like to do them right on their phones, and they can be easily modified for ELLs. You can copy those Google Forms after you create them, create alternate versions with limited number of multiple choice answers. You can embed images. There's a ton of options. So I highly recommend getting in and playing around with Google Forms. If you like looking at data, you can also have it spit out great spreadsheets on the back end to help you really look at the data and perform some item analysis. I see people mentioning Screencastify. So in general, if you're recording a video and then posting it, videos will kind of load the same across the board. If you make Google Slides and narrating them, essentially what you're really doing is just creating a video, so shouldn't be too much of a problem. All right, some Google tools that work for synchronous learning. So we'll talk about Google Meet and Hangouts. It seems to be, I will say in my experience, it seems to be easier for students as it is already part of Google Suite. It records directly to your Google Drive, so it makes it really easy to post to Google Classroom after the fact. It supports more participants at a single time than Zoom, and it is BOCES approved, at least for Capital District. It has been deemed to be FERPA and EdLaw 2D compliant. Cons, no universal muting, no airbrushing. Sorry, people like to airbrush in Zoom. Google Drive can be an interesting synchronous tool too, because you can get real-time commenting and chat on documents. The +1 feature is really nice to draw people's attention. So to do that, you just open up a comment and click on the, you type in plus whomever, plus the person's name, and it'll draw their attention to it. They'll actually get a notification about it. Comments and the resolve feature can be a great way to track response feedback. So I see people asking C2D. So EdLaw 2D. I believe I have that right. It's just there are certain laws about communication tools that we can use with students, and ones that are approved or not approved based on the security of the way they do their data, which is why we can't currently use Zoom for communication with students. You can use Zoom to record meetings, but not for live meetings with students. Chat, I do want to point out the chat feature is turned off in some districts. I see people mention Google Meet. Yeah, the easiest way to do it is the classroom calendar. That's how I always do it. And then they get an alert when we're about to have a meeting. And just looking at other questions here. Okay, I want to talk about some non-Google tools for asynchronous learning. I know we're running a little long on time here, so I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. So some pros to using Zoom. From what I have been hearing and reading, Zoom is working quickly on being compliant with education regulations and laws, so that I think there's a reasonable chance that happens while we are still out on whatever you want to call this for for the coronavirus. So there's definitely pros to go to Zoom if it becomes available. Better muting ability. You can turn on airbrush to if you have that. I don't remember the last time I took a shower. Existential crisis. You can mute everybody, which is great. I see somebody mentioning. I call it the great pause. Yes, absolutely. But as I mentioned, cons with Zoom, there are potential FERPA issues. They're currently being sorted out. It can be slightly more difficult to access for students as it is not within the Google Suite. So keep that in mind. Moving on. Okay, I want to talk about some other tools that can support asynchronous learning. So for those of you who are familiar with Padlet, you know how great it is. For those of you who are not familiar with Padlet, I think you're in for kind of a treat right now. Padlet is fantastic for collaboration. It's easy to provide context and multimodal learning opportunities. The only con that I really have to it is that you have a limited number of boards with the free version. So I'm going to open up an example here and kind of show you what Padlet looks like. So these are not my students. This is a publicly available Padlet. I'll give it a second for it to load. So we can see resolutions that people have posted. Anybody can comment and add onto it. People can post different things. You can put in images. You can attach hyperlinks. This is a great tool for both ELLs and non-ELLs alike. So I highly recommend using Padlet if you get the chance. Just get it and play. There we go. It loaded. We can see some of the conversations that students are having about it. They can use emojis with it. Lots and lots of great features to Padlet. That has changed since I looked at it earlier because now I see there are a couple swear words in it, so I'm apologizing for that ahead of time. So moving on. All right. Best practices, non-Google tools to support asynchronous learning. I would recommend using, have some kind of video editing platform that you can easily use. Great thing about WeVideo, but you can use other ones as well. You can easily stitch multiple videos together. You can add text and images to go along with video. You can change out or re-record audio. You can also assign it for students. So is it Mac compatible? Yes, it is Mac compatible because it is a web-based platform, which is nice. So Chromebook, Mac, PC, doesn't matter, it'll work. Actually have students regularly create videos in WeVideo. So I'm going to see if this is going to work. I got a hunch though, based on the issue that we had before. Let's see if I can share my audio here. I might be able to. All right, so I'm hearing again, people. All right, can everybody hear me okay again? I messed around with the audio there a little bit to try to fix it. All right, perfect. See people saying yes, good. All right, so it doesn't seem to want to communicate the audio, but this is a video that my ELL students created to practice rhetorical strategies. So one of the great things about WeVideo, I've used this down as low as 6th grade. It's very effective and fairly intuitive for ELLs to use. I saw somebody asking, what is the purpose of Padlet? So the purpose of Padlet is it is collaborative. It is highly collaborative. The whole class, you can assign a particular pad to a particular class, and the whole class can get on there at once and sort of respond to things asynchronously. And they can also include images and links and anything that they want to use to help communicate a particular idea, which makes it really great for ELLs. Can you regulate the pad? Yes, you can delete out inappropriate comments and that kind of stuff. Okay, moving on. All right, I want to talk about some other asynchronous video tools. So VoiceThread and Flipgrid are both fantastic, and they can work really well with ELLs. So VoiceThread, again, the audio isn't going to work here, but I'll give you kind of a quick gist of what it is. So this is a publicly available one that I'm showing you right now. So there's audio going on right now. I know you can't hear it, but what people can do is at different points in the audio track, they can actually respond to it. They can post comments responding to it. You can do that with audio or video. So it's a really, really useful tool for having people sort of respond to things in a particular timeline. The other one I want to show you quickly is Flipgrid. So using Flipgrid, students can actually record a response to a particular question. So again, I'll show you just quickly what this looks like. I know the audio isn't working right now, but so this is one of my students. His name is Jordan. He's 18 and he gave me his permission to use this. Jordan is a native Chinese speaker. So basically, it gives them a chance to practice doing like a testimonial with the computer. And kids can respond to each other. And yes, Flipgrid can, so they can post to Google Classroom, or they can just share a link with me. I see people asking about Flipgrid. Yeah, Flipgrid is a wonderful tool. Wonderful, wonderful tool. And if anybody has any extra Flipgrid tips, I see it's been a very popular tool, which is fantastic. If you have extra tips for Flipgrid, feel free to mention that in the comments. I see a mention about VoiceThread. Oh, fantastic VoiceThread tip. So I recommend everybody check out the chat for the tip from Madeline on VoiceThread. Flipgrid can do closed captioning, yes. Yeah, VoiceThread is similar to Edpuzzle. There's Edpuzzle has some different tools to it as well. All right, some other tools that I want to talk about quickly. I'm sure many of you are aware of some or most or all of these, but with the idea that all teachers are teachers of reading, not just our ELL teachers, not just our English teachers, our science teachers, our math teachers, our history teachers, obviously our English teachers. Common Lit. Common Lit is a fantastic resource. Common Lit, so what Common Lit will let you do is it'll actually let you search. If you want to focus on teaching a particular standard, it'll pull up an article about it. You can pull up articles relating to particular standards. It gives you great data on the back end about how students are performing on those particular standards. Feedback is very quick on it because typically it'll be primarily multiple choice questions. You can turn on guiding questions where it won't open the rest of the article until they've answered some of the guiding questions correctly. There'll be assessment questions. They're mostly multiple choice with one or two short answer that you'll grade, but they're always quick to grade. So students can get feedback very quickly and you can get really good data about how they're really doing. It also has a highlight tool built in and a annotation tool, and it has translation and read aloud built into it. So Common Lit is completely free for everything. So yes, it does. See that read aloud button right here? It does read aloud. So I see a general suggestion. Check with your district's IT about services. Always a good idea. Absolutely. So great question. Can these be posted on Google Classroom as a web link for the kids? So yes, that's what's great about Common Lit, is that it absolutely can be posted to Google Classroom. Actually, it plays among the nicest of about any resource that I'm showing you with Google Classroom. Not only can it post to Classroom, when you grade assignments on Common Lit can actually sync with Google Classroom, so it'll automatically post those grades back to Google Classroom afterwards. It has saved me a lot of time. No Red Ink, I'll talk about quickly. No Red Ink has free and paid versions. No Red Ink can be great because students, when they first sign up for it, basically they will generate sort of an interest profile. So they'll click on movies, video games, books, whatever that they're interested in, and then it'll give them grammar practice, and it'll generate sentences using those interests that they have selected, which is really great. And it gives great data on the back end for teachers to look at. So if you're interested in sort of data-informed instruction, very useful. And News ELA, and my guess is most of you know about News ELA already, but just as a reminder, one of the best things about News ELA for ELLs is differentiation, because you can spit out versions of News ELA articles at multiple lexile levels, so you can have every student in the class reading the same article without actually reading the same article. So it's a really excellent tool for differentiation. I see somebody mentioned ReadWorks. ReadWorks is also great, absolutely. All right, Canva. Love Canva. Canva, and there are other tools that do the same thing, but I'm just going to pull up Canva here for a second. So Canva is great for graphic design and infographics. It allows ELLs the opportunity to create or use infographics to communicate information, and helps bridge the gap between what they know and might be able to communicate via language. So I also use it. This is an infographic. This is how I do my syllabus now every year, just to help students understand it a little bit better. But I'll show you some things that my students have also completed on Canva. So this is a social justice advocacy project that I do with my students. So I have a group of kids from Yemen this year, and they created this project. So they created a Google site, they created a wee video, they did all of this themselves. And down here, you can see 2 infographics that they created completely on their own. They had no assistance from me on this. Whoops, went away, hang on. So they created these infographics completely on their own using Canva. Their goal was they had to raise awareness of a particular social justice issue. So they wanted to help improve, raise awareness about the suffering of children in Yemen right now due to the civil war. So they did the research, they created these entirely on their own. They even created QR code that links people directly to a site where people can make donations to help fight the famine going on in Yemen right now. So kids generated these completely on their own using Canva. Canva is a very, very useful tool. Some of what's in Canva is limited. There are both paid and free versions, but what's great is Canva also allows you to import images into it, so you can find lots of digital rights free media online and then import it into Casta, and it works perfectly, or into Canva, and it works absolutely perfectly. All right, I see we're getting close on time here, so I'm just about to the end. Some tools to make life easier. One tool I want to talk to you about, this isn't as useful right now because in theory, we're not grading and copying it to, we use Infinite Campus in North Colony. But the grade transfer, so it's called grade transfer. It is a Chrome extension, and you add it, and essentially what it will do is it will transpose grades. Let's say you do all your grading in Google Classroom. it'll transpose that column of grades along with the students' names directly onto Infinite Campus. And there's a little training video for it that will show you exactly how to do it. But it has saved me hours of time copying grades over. So a little plug for grade transfer. Awesome Screenshot is another tool I use. Have some kind of tool. There are lots of them out there. I just use Awesome Screenshot, but have some tool for grabbing screenshots of various things to show students how to do stuff. I like Awesome Screenshot because it's free and it will let you easily capture and edit screenshots of either selected areas of the screen, windows, even whole pages. Really useful. Another little plug I want to give, you might want to, if you're interested in getting data on student engagement, there is a program that has come out of Stanford University called PERTS Copilot. My district recently started participating in this year. I'm the team captain at the high school, and basically students complete surveys on their level of engagement with a teacher and how they feel the teacher views them and stuff like that. And it's all anonymous. And what's great about it too is that it's more of a teacher-driven tool than an administrator-driven tool. So your co-pilot captain will be another teacher, and it'll give you really useful data for improving student engagement, which could be really useful right now in a time when we're all struggling to get student engagement. And then the only other thing I want to give a plug for is whatever helps bring you peace right now. So Spotify, Pandora, other music apps, podcasts, and whatever you use to order wine. All useful right now. All right, so let's revisit our KWL charts. So did what was covered match with what you already knew? Did what was covered match with what you wanted to learn? And then let's think about some questions that you may have on the next slide. All right, so questions. I'm going to let Jerome try to field some questions here. Jerome, if you want to hop on the mic and just read them to me, and I will do my best to answer them verbally.
All right, so we have one from about, is there a way to have, this was back on Google Translate, to have text be read aloud, especially for lower incidence languages like Dari or Farsi?
That is a great question. So it does have a speaker option baked into Google Translate when it's smaller kind of word for word stuff. There may be some tools out there for sort of reading the whole thing, but the whole translation, that is. If people are aware of them, feel free to plug those in the chat. I see people mention the Speak It extension. So that could be very useful. Other questions?
There was one about Padlet. It said, it says, does it collect the names and email addresses of contributors, and has that changed?
So I typically have my students register. I can't speak to sort of the macro level rules with Padlet, but what I can say is I typically have my students register. So within North Colony, we use an @NCCS K-12 domain, which is our Google domain within our school district. And I always make them register with that.
And here's one more. Toughest speaking modality for ELLs is in the situation of speaking. What tool would you most recommend for helping students practice their speaking and get feedback about it?
So that's a great question. To once again preach the virtues of Flipgrid. Flipgrid is quick, easy to get videos. They can respond directly to a question you ask them verbally. So to do speaking practice asynchronously, that can be a great way to do it. Probably the quickest and easiest. Yeah, I would recommend Flipgrid for that. And I see another person mentioning Seesaw. I'm familiar with Seesaw's existence, but I haven't used it a ton. So highly recommend that as well. Other questions?
There's one here from Candy over in the chat window. Says, is there anything that you could use for K through 5 without signing up for an account?
As some people have mentioned in the chat, Padlet does have a non-account option. The best thing I would recommend with that grade level I know some districts do have, even students at that grade level have accounts, like Google accounts that have been created for them. Unfortunately, for a lot of stuff, you do need an account. So the best way to do it is just limit it and sign up for everything with that account. Or if your district has access to, there are a number of tools that provide universal sign-ins. Different districts use different tools, but there are universal sign-ins, so they only have to log in once, and then they'll click and it will go to the various tools. My brain is blanking right now on the one that North Colony uses. Clever. That's the one. Thank you. Yep. I see somebody mentioned Clever. Thank you, Diana. Much appreciated.
Is
Yes.
there a way to include just an audio recording into Google Slides?
Yes, there are a few ways to include just an audio recording in Google Slides. So you can either record on your phone using a memo and then export the file, or what I like to do is I will go into WeVideo and actually just record an audio file and then export that audio file as an MP4, and then I will embed that MP4 directly into my Google Slides. You can just go to insert audio, or you can insert it as a video that is just audio. There are a number of ways to do it.
Is grade transfer 2D compliant?
That is a great question. My guess is that it may not be. I can tell you it is something that has been developed directly by a teacher, and he's made the framework completely free. He doesn't get any money out of it. What I would say to that end is typically what causes things to not be compliant is their ability to save data. So if you go, I do a little bit of coding on my own, and you can go in and look at the coding on grade transfer. Grade transfer does not save any data beyond when it copies and pastes it. Once it has pasted the data, there's no data being saved whatsoever. Nothing is being sent to a server anywhere. All right, other questions? I know we're running a little long here. I appreciate those of you who have stuck around.
What can we do for students who do not have access getting online, especially those SIFE newcomers who have minimal access?
It's tricky. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to put it this way, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, the best thing I would say is, at least try to make those phone calls when you can. If your district has been gracious enough to still grant you access to use interpreters, have interpreters make a phone call, for you, just to keep those connections going with families. Try to make the phone calls yourself. Google Voice can be a great way to make phone calls without giving out your actual phone numbers. I see people mentioning packets. Packets are not a bad last case resort for those students who have limited internet access, and we know we have those folks in our communities. But I saw another person mentioning raising awareness. Raising awareness is one of the best things we can do, and reach out to local telecom companies. So I see people mentioning Google Voice. That's true. I use Google Voice with my personal Gmail account because it doesn't show that for students either way. I have access to it. But it is a good point. Other questions?
One more, it looks like. Looking at Google Classroom in a synchronous learning situation, how important is having visual interface contact?
So that visual interface contact is super important, I think, because we talked about how language is fundamentally social. Those of us who work with ELLs do so much gesturing. I don't know if you can see me on camera now, but I'm doing a lot of gesturing. We do so much gesturing because ELLs rely heavily on social cues because language is learned fundamentally socially. So the more you can do to embed those cues, very helpful. Very, very helpful.
All right.
All right.
That's all the questions. I'm going to share out the recording tomorrow. We'll share the slides with you, and I'll also share the chat box with you because there's a number of really good resources in there. Everybody participated. Thank you so much. Yeah, so thanks again for participating and your passion for educating your students, and we'll see. With attendance, I said, please email me if you were here, jasteele@casdany.org, and I will make sure to mark you. I'll also be sending out the recording, so feel free to share the recording with your colleagues who would benefit from this. And again, we appreciate you. Thank you so much, Kurt. You always do great work. So yeah, I'm going to end the meeting now, and thanks again, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I just want to say be well and take care of yourselves. This is a difficult time. Thank you for your dedication, your craft. Thank you for everything that you do for your students. Just remember to try to take time to be gracious to yourself. As tough as all this is, I think the people that we tend to be the toughest on are ourselves. And at some point you sort of have to hit that, am I doing everything I can and still able to take care of myself? And if you're doing that, there's nothing more that we can ask of you. So thank you to everybody for everything that you do for the field of teaching. Thank you to CASDA for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to so many of you who have stuck around the extra 11 minutes here. I really appreciate it. All right, take care, everybody.
All right, one more time on my email address. You can email me at jasteele@casdany.org. I see people leaving their emails in the chat box. I'll note that there as well. So you will get your credit for this. Yeah, so again, we appreciate you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.